Hi there, everyone. My name is AJ Cerna. I am a YA fantasy author as well as an overall story lover, though I will admit, by some booktube standards, I'm kind of a poser. On a good year, I'll probably read around 50 plus books. My wife, complete opposite, the other half of this channel, what was it, 150 plus books last year or something?
160 something.
160 something last year. So I'm not pulling those numbers, but I'm still a huge fan. Still love storytelling, and today I'm telling you about some books that I loved, but also kind of hated. You'll see what I mean in a little bit. So all these books, to be clear, I love, but they have elements that I deeply hate. So yeah, look at all the love, all the love. So let's start with this one, and ironically, it's not this one. So this is The Angel's Game by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. This is actually not the book. I'm talking about Shadow of the Wind, which is the first book in the Cemetery of Lost Books. I forget the actual name of the series, but there's several books in the series that he wrote before he passed away about a magical library. And they tend to be gothic in nature, these stories, and they're really fun. And this was actually my introduction to the series. It was the second one that he wrote, the first one being The Shadow of the Wind. Now, The Shadow of the Wind, I'm a little bit bitter about it because it's the one that everyone talks about from this series. Whereas for me, this is the best one, The Angel's Game. And that's not necessarily the reason I dislike aspects of it. The main reason for me is it got real boring about halfway through the book for a sizable chunk. But there's this amazing twist about 2/3 of the way through that really rectifies it. It's still a problem, but at the end of the day, it is able to loop it around and make it still a fantastic book that I think you all should read, but not as good as this, and still something I kind of love-hate. So, first one, The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. Here's the next one. This is probably, I think, the most recent book that I've read in the pile. I like the idea of it. The execution is hit or miss. And it is a series of books, but the first one is Before the Coffee Gets Cold. And I realized I didn't summarize the last one, but that's okay. You don't need to worry about it. Before the Coffee Gets Cold, this one is about a magical coffee shop where you can go back in time to a specific time. You just have to get back before the coffee gets cold. And it's almost kind of like a series of vignettes within the coffee shop of people going back to correct mistakes or to go back and see things in their lives that maybe they want a second look at for one reason or another. So it has that sort of very magical realist, bittersweet feeling you hope to get from the story. That's the good part. The bad part to me is the writing. There's a lot of telling. They tell you things constantly throughout this story that I feel like could have just been implied through scenes in the story. And honestly, things that are implied in scenes throughout the story and then repeated and repeated. And I'm like, I get it. I understand what's happening. You don't need to hit me over the head with it. Also, another thing I know that is potentially problematic about this book is that its lessons tend to skew conservative in terms of where it seems to imply the characters really need to take their lives. And I'll leave it at that, but I could certainly see from a more feminine point of view that being problematic. But me, dude, yeah, it's problematic. Didn't affect me as much as it may affect you. But still really good. I bawled like a little baby. It was a deeply moving evening. Anyways, moving on. One of my favorite authors of all time, Philip Pullman, has recently been revisiting his Dark Materials with The Book of Dust. And this story tells a tale of a servant boy, if I recall. It's been a while since I've read this. And it's about him saving Lyra Belacqua, who is the protagonist. And I realize I'm probably holding this on the wrong side. The protagonist of his Dark Materials series. And I like revisiting the world of his Dark Materials. It is oddly both more grounded than his Dark Materials and also more effing weird. Like, it's grounded, and then in the final act of the story, it almost turns into a fable fairy tale. And I legitimately still don't understand where that leads. We actually own the second book, The Secret Commonwealth. I have yet to read it for two reasons. One, I want the trilogy to be finished. I know it's not yet. I think it's going to be a trilogy. Two, I don't know what to expect from it, and I feel like I'm probably going to need to revisit this first to fully understand what's happening. Yeah, I both loved it because of revisiting the world that I love so much, and didn't like it because of how weird it was. I felt like I understood the world less at the end than I did at the end of the trilogy of the last His Dark Materials series. So there we go. The Book of Dust, or I guess the Volume 1, La Belle Sauvage, which is what the first volume is called. Next book we have here is Tomorrow When Tomorrow When Tomorrow Creeps, except minus the creeps part, just tomorrow and tomorrow. This is a story about a male and female friend. They met when they were very young, and it's tracking their relationship over the course of, I think, decades, if I recall correctly, from when they're young to when they start a video game development studio. This is a strange book to me because I feel like, and maybe it's just me in literary fiction, I did not want a literary experience. And what I mean is something that is just... this maybe just tells a lot about me, the story. It just feels overly emotional for what I wanted. Like, I wanted to get into the nuts and bolts of the video game development stuff, and it did, to be fair. But then it's had its characters who were so deeply problematic and flawed and toxic towards each other. I'm not one of those readers who's very much, oh, if you're a terrible character or if you do something bad, I don't like it. If there's an affair subplot, maybe I won't like it, but I'm like, I'm not going to be offended by it. I'm not going to be like, oh, that book has an affair subplot, and I don't like affairs, therefore I don't like that book. That's not the reader I am. But still, there's some parts in here where I'm just like, dude, get help. Like, talk to somebody. Because there is so much toxicity here that it just became hard to stomach. Still a very amazing and moving story. Didn't delve as much into video game stuff as I wanted, but still definitely worth your time. There's a reason why it won so many awards last year, and I don't remember which ones they were. But yeah, it's definitely made a name for itself for a reason, and definitely worth your time, especially if you like video games and you're interested in the development of them. It's a good read. It's, I guess, in some ways I should be grateful that the video game industry is getting a literary sort of take on it. So there is that. The next one is from a very popular author who is very hit or miss with me, and that is Haruki Murakami, After Dark. This is a story that follows... Is it Tokyo? Yeah, Tokyo. It's basically a night in Tokyo following a few different characters. And honestly, if you like slice-of-life stories, it is a good time. It is fun to read. It's easy to get into. It's not incredibly long. The font isn't that big. It's only a couple hundred pages. You can take a look there. It's pretty digestible. But there's this weird subplot. And maybe I'm just not really the target audience for this, but there is this sort of writing style and distance that Haruki Murakami puts into it that is confusing, and it has to do with the way it's explained about somebody who's watching somebody sleeping, and the way it's portrayed, it almost feels like someone has a security camera and is like viewing this person through it, and it explains it in a very odd way, and I was like, oh, intriguing, okay, what's gonna happen there? The answer is nothing. Nothing's gonna happen there. It's never gonna be explained, sorry, spoiler, and we're never really gonna understand what perspective we're really pulling from that. And maybe I'm dumb, maybe it's scattered throughout the entire story and I was just not able to piece it together, but I spent the whole time afterwards thinking, why? What was the point of that other than just to be weird? Murakami, are you okay? But he's rich, he's good. Still worth your time if you like Murakami. It's probably one of his more grounded efforts, but still has that twinge of weirdness, but maybe not as much as you're used to if you're used to like the Wind-Up Bird Chronicle or Kafka on the Shore. I haven't read Kafka on the Shore, but I hear weird things. Another one here, we got Oathbringer. I know, it's the third book in a series, so this is the third book from the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. Oathbringer, and it is probably the most action-heavy up to this point in the series. The most... Well, there's a lot of war in all of them, but there is literally over 100 pages of climax. Like, it is too much climax. Like, I'm sure as many people would tell you, too much of a good thing is possible. And I actually felt myself, as I was between reading and listening to it, I was growing numb to, the action scenes that were going on, and I just started to zone out, frankly. And it's been a couple of years since I finished it, and you know that feeling you get when you watch or read something that you still don't feel like you actually read or watched it? I'm still not sure I really read this all the way through, even though I have. And I think it just had everything to do, by the time I got to that point, I was exhausted. I felt like I needed a cigarette, but it just kept going. It kept going and going, and I don't know, it was very hard to stomach. So the rest of it leading up to it is great, but it was too much. It was too much of everything coming together. And I would summarize this for you, but it's the third book in the series, so it's basically a fantasy war epic with lots of different plot points happening and then converging at the very end, which is why the battle sequence is so long. But once again, love-hate. Lastly, I have another Philip Pullman book, and this is an easier one. So I think I mentioned before how much I love his Dark Materials. As I've gotten older, though, there have been some aspects of the storytelling that I find problematic, not in the problematic way that we use nowadays, but like in the storytelling sense, where I feel like Lyra Belacqua, the protagonist of the series, gets just tossed around everywhere. Now, in her defense, she is not a passive protagonist. She actively seeks out and does things, but there are so many sequences, especially both in the first part, the Golden Compass, and in the last part, the Amber Spy class, where stuff is just happening to her. And at some point, I'm just like, oh my god, give this character some agency to make some choices on her own. I've only realized that as I've gotten older that I wish this story had more of that. Definitely still a classic in fantasy. It transgresses demographic. If you'll notice at the bookstore, it's like in the children's section, in the YA section, in the adult fantasy section, maybe not the adult fantasy section, but it's all over the place. And there's a reason why it is a classic. You definitely should read it, but with the lens that maybe this wouldn't fly as much nowadays because of all the agency this character is robbed. Anyways, that is it for my take on books that I hate loved. Thank you so much for being here as I vent at you. Let me know some books that you both love and hate in the comments, and be sure to subscribe if you want more bookish/story related content. And yeah, we'll see you in the next video.